Hey everybody, welcome to Always Bored Never Boring. As Halloween is fast approaching, I wanted to do a spooky themed painting guide. So today I'm going to show you 3 different ways to paint blazing skeletons from Dungeons & Dragons. That means 3 different ways to paint skeletons and 3 different ways to paint mystical magical fire. For the first one, we are starting with a base coat of white. So any white will do, and we are going to paint the skeleton with Abaddon Black because for this skeleton we want it to look charred and blackened because it is wreathed in flame. And this particular painting guide for this first blazing skeleton is the most unusual one. It gives the most unnatural finish, and in fact I refer to it as my Scooby-Doo one because it does look a little bit like a Scooby-Doo villain in a costume when it is all done. Once the Abaddon Black has been layered on, we're going to do an Eshin Grey dry brush. This is going to pick out all the raised details on the skeleton. So I'm not being too careful. It doesn't matter if any gets on the white at this point because we're going to deal with that later. I'm now going to do a second dry brush, this time with Dawnstone. And I'm focusing more on the most raised areas, so the face and the forward shoulder, those areas that are most prominent. And then I'm going to give the whole thing a wash of Nuln Oil. And this is just going to knock that grey back down again. It's going to make the skeleton look more black again whilst maintaining some of the definition that the dry brushing brought out. So these are very simple painting techniques I'm using. This is to get tabletop quality miniatures. Next we're going to Averland Sunset. And we are going to base coat the fire. We're going to use 2 thinned down coats of Averland Sunset. Being very careful not to get it over the skeleton that we have already painted because our skeleton at this point is actually finished. So we're going to be moving on to the fire. And like I say, for this one I wanted something really unnatural, something that looks completely out of the ordinary. So you can see with the Averland Sunset layered on, we're now going to do a layer of Flash Gitz Yellow. Again, we're thinning the paint slightly and we're focusing on the most raised areas, leaving the Averland Sunset in the recesses, which is not the normal way to paint fire. When I do a more traditional fire later in the video, you'll see that it's a very different technique. We're now moving to Hexwraith Flame, and what I'm going to do here is I'm going to apply Hexwraith Flame to the edges of the fire, going about halfway down the flames so that we get a transition from yellow to green. Once the first application of Hexwraith Flame is dry, I will do another coat of Hexwraith Flame, but focusing even more on the points of the flame so we get more of a transition out to green. While that is drying, I'm just going to layer on some Mechanicus Standard Grey on the base, and the reason I do this is because for all my D&D miniatures I use Astrogranite textured paint, and putting down some Mechanicus Standard Grey underneath it just means that if you miss a little bit and a little bit of the textured paint you can see through the base, you still see grey. With that done, we're now going to move to blue tone, and this is going to complete the fire effect. And I'm just going to apply some blue tone to the very tips of the fire. And this is actually based on a Warhammer TV painting guide for Rubicon Marines for the flaming icons they have, which are a very unnatural, distinct looking type of flame. But I've adapted it slightly. So I'm just being careful not to go over the green too much. And there we go, that is finished. So I'm going to apply some Astrogranite to the base. I'm going to show you how I do the base here. After the Astrogranite, it's a highlight of Ulthuan Grey. I'm not going to go through the bases on any of the other blazing skeletons because they are all done in exactly the same way. So it's Mechanicus Standard Grey, then Astrogranite textured paint, then Ulthuan Grey dry brush, and then Abaddon Black on the rim. And that is our finished Scooby-Doo villain. As you can see, a very unnatural look. For our second one, this is the easiest one of the three. We are starting with a base coat of Army Painter Necrotic Flesh, and I actually used a spray can, a rattle can, because I actually had Necrotic Flesh base coat. And we are now going to apply Hexwraith Flame all over the fire. So we want to be a little bit careful not to get it on the skeleton, because we're not going to do too much with the skeleton. So I'm just applying Hexwraith Flame all over those fire elements, because we're going to go for a mystical, magical green fire. We're now switching to Agrax Earthshade to do a wash on the skeleton. You can see the fire already looks pretty good. I've never used Hexwraith Flame over Necrotic Flesh before, and it looks really good. It's something I will certainly be doing again in the future. So anyway, I'm applying this Agrax Earthshade. I'm just being careful not to pool it too much in the recesses and not to get it over the Hexwraith Flame, but bring out all those bony details on the skeleton itself. So it's not difficult. You have to be really careful, just careful enough not to ruin what you're doing. And now we are going back to Necrotic Flesh. And what we're going to do here is dry brush the fire, focusing mainly on the most raised areas towards the tips of the flames, just to bring out some of that definition and brighten up the edges of the fire. And then I'm going to add a small amount of skeleton bone to the Necrotic Flesh to do a final dry brush right on the very tips. This is probably like a 2-to-1, 2 parts Necrotic Flesh to 1 part skeleton bone, just for the very, very edges. And then still with our skeleton bone, I'm going to layer on to the actual skeleton itself, and I'm doing 2 thin coats of this. So layering on, staying away from the recesses of the miniature, just to brighten it up and just make it pop. And once you've layered on the skeleton bone, you're basically done, apart from again doing the base. So Mechanicus Standard Grey, Astrogranite Texture Paint, Ulthuan Grey, Dry Brush, Abaddon Black on the rim. And then that is completely finished, our easiest skeleton. And now we're moving on to the final one, which I have undercoated with skeleton bone. Again, I had a spray can of skeleton bone, and I am using Army Painter Soft Tone, and I'm going to apply this onto the skeleton to bring out the details. Soft Tone works really well on skeleton bone. It will bring out all the details without being too dark and without being too aggressive in its definition. And this is going to be the most traditional painting technique for blazing skeletons. We're going to do proper fire. I'm now using skeleton bone, and I'm just going to do a dry brush on the skeleton, and that is all I'm going to do. You can do several highlights if you want, adding some white to the skeleton bone each time, but I'm literally just doing 1 dry brush of skeleton bone just to get it done, because the fire is the main focus of this miniature. And when you're painting fire, real fire, you do things in reverse order. You start with your light colours and you work up to your dark colours, which is not how you would normally do things. So I'm starting by layering on 2 coats of matte white paint. If you've got Keramite white or something like that, that's the way to go. And yes, so all of the fire will be undercoated white. And we will now progressively work up to the darker colours, doing the complete opposite of what you would normally expect, because fire is brighter at its heart than it is at the edges. So it's completely different to painting other types of elements. We're now using demonic yellow, and I am going to water this down significantly because I don't want a lot of yellow, and I want to leave the white right at the center of the fire. So we have white transitioning into a thinned out yellow. And you can see that as I'm applying it, I will keep applying more fluid to stretch that colour out further. And then when that's done, we're going to move to lava orange. And we're going to do a very similar thing here. I'm watering it down a lot, and I'm applying the lava orange about halfway down the flames. So we will start to get a transition from the white through the yellow to the orange. Just being careful not to go over all the white. When that's done, we are now going to do a lava orange dry brush. And again, we're sort of just trying to blend those transitions together a little bit, because fire isn't a smooth element. It's something. It's ragged. We're now doing a dry brush of Mephiston red. So this is our darker color again, and we're focusing right towards the ends of the flames, just to really make the ends of the fire bright red. So it just requires a delicate hand. And then finally, we're actually going to do a dry brush of Abaddon Black right on the very tips, because right at the edge of fire, you will get the burning carbon. So this will just really make it look like it's a real fire that's burning. You don't want to do a lot of this, just very, very, very minor amounts right on the absolute tips of the flames. And that will be the end of it. And there you go. Once you've based that miniature up, you have 3 different styles of blazing skeleton. My personal favourite is the middle one in this image with the traditional fire, but I do really like the green as well. Hopefully, one of these methods you find useful. Do feel free to let me know in the comments which one you prefer. But that is it from me and from this spooky Halloween special painting guide. Thank you very much for watching. If you've liked the video, please consider pressing the like button, and if you have really liked the video, please consider subscribing to the channel if you do not already do so. And hopefully I will see you all again very soon. Happy Halloween, everybody. Bye bye.